Hi, and thank you for tuning in to another edition of Here's the Thing, DPR the Man, That's Who I Am. My show this time around, as promised in my preview on the website, www.heresdathing.com, is about the gender issue in this country and some common sense regarding the gender issue in this country. A lot of information, dug around a bunch. Psychology Today, WebMD, Daily Beast, Pathorg, all sorts of interesting sources out there, some left and some right and some neither. But bottom line is this, it's an extremely confusing and complicated issue. It's been simplified to a sinful degree by the left. We'll get into that in a little while, but right now I just want to start with the basics. First of all, biologically speaking, genetically speaking, the sex of a baby is determined solely by the father's chromosomes. Basically, a mother and a father have 46 sets of chromosomes that make them up. Half of those from the mother and half of those from the father come together to make a new human being. Most of us know that from our basic science or biology courses in our past history. For those of you who don't, consider yourselves enlightened. The mother, oh, by the way, let's backtrack a little bit. The chromosomes that determine sex, X chromosomes and Y chromosomes. The mother carries two X chromosomes. X chromosomes are female chromosomes. The father carries an X and a Y. Okay, the Y chromosome makes him the father, a male. When two people get together, the father donates a whole bunch of cells with X's and Y's. Not in each cell, but cells with X's and cells with Y's. Whichever one of those two happens to initiate conception determines the sex of the baby. So if a Y chromosome gets in, it's going to be a boy. If an X chromosome gets in, it's going to be a girl. That's the most, that is the black and white simplistic view of what happens. Science has discovered that there are variations in the number of chromosomes, so to speak, that a person can carry, or the effectiveness of those chromosomes. The so-called SRY segment of a Y chromosome, which is the part of the chromosome, the gene, that triggers male development in all senses of the physical development of a male, hormonally, physically, structurally, if you will. That's the SRY gene on the Y chromosome that makes a male a male. Okay, so that's basically it for the sex of a baby. Now, in the Daily Beast, there was an article, part of which I'm going to talk about now and part later, which summed it up rather well, I thought, for a leftist publication. Sex refers mainly to the biology and is a configuration of chromosomes, hormones, gonads, ovaries or testicles, reproductive units, sperm and egg, and internal and external anatomy. And while sex is often talked about as if there are only two options are male and female, the two-sex system is inadequate for understanding the sex characteristics of all people. Gender is more about your personal sense of who you are, man, woman, transgender, etc. Gender primarily refers to qualities that are masculine or feminine or neither or both. Just as sex is often talked about as male-female, gender is often thought about as being man or woman. However, this binary gender system is inadequate for understanding the gender of all humans, especially across cultures. Many societies are now expanding their use of gender terms. Boy, are they ever. Now, before we move on, I want to make it absolutely clear that I personally am not judging the rightness or wrongness of any of these concepts, or any of the results of these concepts, or anyone out there who deals with these concepts in their lives. This isn't about right and wrong. This isn't about good or bad. This isn't about normal or abnormal. Because the fact of the matter is we don't know. And so we move on. And so, as promised, we move on. Okay, so now we've talked a little bit about the sex determination of a baby. Excuse me while I remove the headphones. I listen to each segment right after I record it to make sure it's presentable. We need to talk a little bit about the gender aspect. If you will recall, a few moments ago, I pointed out that gender is more about the personal sense of who you are. And how does that personal sense originate? Where does it come from? It's a psychological thing. It's a hormonal thing. Oh, there's the key. You see, the SRY segment of the Y chromosome doesn't always work the way it should. Or at least the way we would expect it to. Let's put it that way. I don't want to make value judgments here, so the word should not be there. It doesn't always work the way that it did when, let's say, when man and woman first came upon the earth. In the billions and billions of men and women and people that have been born since the inception of mankind, however you want to believe that occurred, all sorts of variations, obviously, are going to occur, and they're going to be passed from generation to generation within cultures, within the world population. The more varied your culture, the less you're going to see these differences. The more closed and pocketed your culture is, the more you're going to see these occur. But I digress. I don't want to digress too much. Gender comes into play when mutations occur in the genes. Now, there's nothing unnatural about that. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no judgment by man or God regarding that. I mean, if you want to hit the religion part of it, we'll get into that. Don't worry. I haven't left that out of my thought process, but I'm not going to do it right now. Mutations cause differences in the way the baby grows into an adult and goes through puberty and so forth, in terms of the release or non-release, or the effectiveness or non-effectiveness of hormones on the developing human being. If certain hormones are inhibited, then certain traits will arise that otherwise wouldn't have. If certain hormones are overly strong, then certain traits will arise that otherwise wouldn't have. Hence, then gender is a psychological state brought about by chemical differences causing structural differences in a person's body. Okay? That's all it is. It's extremely complicated, and science has yet to discover all of the possibilities, or how they work, or why. And it really isn't important, other than for the pursuit of knowledge, if you will. It isn't going to change anything if they know how or why. It still happens, and it still is going to continue to happen. One of the points I want to make real quick, though, is it only happens in a very small segment of the world's population. There are pockets. There are pocket cultures that have a high rate of occurrence of these various mutations, because they're closed, because they breed amongst themselves, and that's it. And it's like anything else, you know, with the royalty back in the old days, hundreds of years ago, the royalty all inbred, and as a result, all kinds of recessive traits and negative things started popping up because they were inbreeding, and you're not supposed to do that if you want to have continuing generations of healthy people. That's another issue, okay? But in these pockets, these cultures, these societies accept these differences as perfectly normal. And we can too, even though in our population, which is hardly closed, as far as how we, you know, who we breed with and who's brought into the mix, you know, the number of people with these mutations are an extreme minority. Now, the only reason I'm pointing this out has nothing to do with whether these people are good or bad, right or wrong. It has nothing to do with it. It has to do with ideological issues, which I'll address later. I want to make that perfectly clear. So, let's get back to the gender thing. Let's see. apath.org. apath.org says that there are 63 genders that they know about right now. 63 genders, ranging from you know, masculine heterosexual men and feminine heterosexual women, all the way to, let's see, where are we at here? Number 63. Androgyne, bisexual, hermaphro females. I don't even know what that is, but I'm sure they exist somewhere. Okay. Masculine heterosexual woman. A masculine homosexual woman. A masculine bisexual woman. Okay, fine. I personally, in my lifetime, have met, obviously, homosexual men, homosexual women, bisexual women. And I have to admit, back in the day, you know, when I was young, and that was a long time ago, and things weren't quite as open as they are now, so I was a little bit uncomfortable until I found out that they're just people. And they're not trying to make me into them, and I'm not trying to make them into me. They're just people. And they have their own issues and their own problems and their own goals and their own dreams and their own failures and their own successes, just like everyone else. Okay? So, who are we to judge one another based on those things? If you don't like those kinds of people, then don't associate with them, but don't get in their faces. There's no reason to do that. any more than there's a reason for them to get into yours. But that's another thing with the ideology that we'll talk about later. Society is made up of everyone in it, and everyone in it is made up of every genetic trait or mutation that's ever existed or ever will exist. We can't change that. You can't teach that, okay? There is no one out there who's a certified man and a bona fide stud, and you can't teach that. Or a certified woman and a bona fide bombshell, and you can't teach that. Okay? So I'm trying to make this subject as palatable as possible, because so many people out there have probably already branded me as some sort of negative being. But these things need to be discussed, because you people out there have to understand what's happening to you because of the media, because of the communication process that's being impressed upon you, how your opinion's being formed, and the misunderstandings that occur because of it. So we jog along to the next subject. The next subject is ideology. How does all this figure into ideology? Fact of the matter is that every article that I read made mention of ideology, but didn't really go into it, because the articles were based on science. The articles were based on what facts are known about sex and gender and genetics and so forth. And unless each of us gets every chromosome and every gene in our body looked at, tested, evaluated, none of us really knows where we are on the scale of 63 genders. Okay? Yes, environment has a lot to do with it. And that's where ideology comes in. I just had a minor epiphany there. I wondered how to segue into it, and it just flew into my head. Okay? Environment has to do with it. How you're brought up. The gender that you're taught to be based upon your physical appearance. Okay? So we run into people who think that it's okay to raise a gender-neutral child and not teach them a thing about where they stand. How much sense does that make? How much sense does that make? How many parents can determine all of the chemical processes and developmental processes and genetic and chromosomal processes that are going on inside of their child at any given moment? And none of them, unless they happen to be a scientist and they're using their child as a lab rat, they don't know. So they have to make a choice. But you see, in today's world, you've got to be something. And if you teach your child to be nothing, then they have to make the decision for themselves. And what tools do they have if they weren't given those tools as they were growing up, when their brain was ready to accept differentiations? So if you raise a gender-neutral child, does that mean that if we all raise gender-neutral children, that down the road, generations from now, all people will accept all things about all people? Does that necessarily follow? No, it doesn't. It means we're going to have a lot of really confused people out there who don't know, who accept everything because they have no choice. They don't know there's a difference. What an ideal world. No differences. Remember what I've said? Freedom is about free individuals and equality is about the same treatment for all individuals, but equality doesn't indicate sameness. It doesn't indicate sameness. We're not all the same. We're all different. We have to accept that. We have to resign ourselves, if you will, to the fact that someone down the road isn't the same as we are. And that's okay. That's okay. So the ideological aspect of this is rather simple. The left and the media behind the left is shoving it down everyone's throat that all these genetic mutations, the extremely small percentage of the population, those are the norm. Well, I have news for you. The norm is male or female. Now, granted, the degree of maleness or femaleness does vary in males and females as they're identified, sexually and gender-wise. But generally speaking, the vast, vast majority of the population are either male or female in sex and gender. A very small portion of the population is all of the other 61 genders. They're allowed to exist. They exist. They need to be treated as human beings. They need to be treated as one would have them treat you. You need to, the golden rule, okay? You need to do that. They exist. They are who they are. They didn't make themselves that way, okay? But we have to be careful as parents not to neglect to teach our children about what they are and who they are and how to determine who they are. Not to be neutral. It's one thing to be neutral towards others, but it's very difficult to be neutral towards yourself. Okay? I have to live with the decisions I make. I have to live with the actions I take and the courses that I choose. And I have to suffer the consequences and be willing to take those consequences. All right? I can be neutral towards other people. I can let them do their thing because they have to live with the consequences of their decisions and their actions and their preferences. I don't. So let them do their thing. Let them be who they are. When it comes to this particular subject, let them be who they are. What difference does it make to me? Personally, none. Doesn't affect me. I identify as and I consider myself sexually as a male, and my wife identifies as and considers herself sexually as a female, and we are a male-female marriage, and that's what we have. We are not part of that minority. Those who are can do as they wish and should be allowed to do so. It's that simple. And if we kept it that simple, this country would be a much better place. But we can't keep it that simple because the left keeps shoving it in our face. That we have to allow it. We must allow it. We have no choice but to accept the fact that we are wrong for what we are and how we present ourselves because it offends the minority. Because the minority is hurt by the fact that they're different and we know that they're different. Of course we do. How can we avoid it? How could we not know they're different? How could they not know that we're different from them? But they have no more right to shove themselves in our faces as we have to shove ourselves in theirs. It's that simple. Okay? It's called coexistence. It's called allowing things to go the way they do because we have no control. It's not in our domain. We do not determine genetics before conception or after conception or during development or after birth. We don't control that. I really believe that we shouldn't, although science is trying to, and that could lead to some real problems down the road. Just ask Adolf Hitler. Okay? So there's my point. There's my rant, if you will, on the ideology of the whole thing. What the media is trying to do to us, to make us accept as the norm, as the majority, if you will, people who are clearly not in the majority, but under the laws of the United States of America, under the Constitution, as human beings, and under, I personally believe, God's law, as human beings, they are entitled to the same rights and privileges and treatment as any other human being, regardless of their sex or gender orientation. Now, the last subject we need to talk about briefly are the religious ramifications. According to the timer on the old camera there, I've got about 6 minutes to devote to that before I run longer than I'd like, so let's get this done. Okay, first of all of you atheists out there, tune out. This is not your segment, okay? I am operating under the premise that there is a God and that he did create mankind. And in that creation, he created men and he created women. And why did he do that? Well, because without the two, nobody else would exist. We have to have masculine males and feminine females to get together to create more people. Plain and simple. Propagation of the species. The instinct to survive as a species. It's there. We can't change it. It's going to remain in place until the end of mankind, whenever that may be. That being said, okay, the possibly infinite number of variations of chromosomes and genes, mutations thereof, I should say, the infinite possibilities for mutations, mean that amongst the population of females and males, there are people who fall gender-wise in between somewhere on the scale. Okay, it has to happen. It has to happen. And if it happens, then who's to say that God didn't make it that way? So all you people out there who are running around ranting and raving about the fact that anyone who isn't totally male or totally female is somehow a sinner and going to hell, that's not your call. Never was, never will be. You have no business judging these people based on your concept of what God wants. If God didn't want these people to exist, they wouldn't exist. But they do. So one has to assume that there's a purpose for their existence. We may argue the point as to what that purpose is, but you can't deny that there must be a purpose if you truly believe in God. Because God created man and God created woman, and God is responsible for all of the things that make up human beings, which include genetic mutations and differences in physical and hormonal development. Science never presumes to say there is no God. They're only trying to figure out what he's done and how he's done it. Okay? We know that these things exist. These differences exist. We know that. You can't deny it. You can't say these people have to go away. They're not going to go away. They shouldn't go away. They were put here. They were born. They were conceived, and that's all there is to it. You can't change that. Get it through your heads, folks. The left would have you believe that every religious person in the country wants to get, exterminate anyone who isn't normal. And there is no normal. There is a norm, but there's no normal. Mathematically speaking, a norm or a majority is there are more of people who follow the typical two-sided guidelines than there are those who don't. Okay? But that doesn't exclude the existence of those who don't. So I don't want to hear any more nonsense about Christians being nutcases because they don't approve of people who don't follow the norm. All right? Leave them alone. Let them be who they are. They're human beings. God says that we need to love our brothers as ourselves. We have to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I don't think you'd be happy if they took up arms and decided to exterminate all the heterosexuals in the world. Okay? That would not be a good thing. But yet, some of you, a very small thimbleful of you in a swimming pool, would do away with all these odd people. And some of you odd people that wouldn't even fill a thimble in a swimming pool would like to do away with all the, quote, normal people. Let's get that crap out of our heads and out of our way and out of our language and out of our thought process. It's unnecessary, it's irrelevant, immaterial, and the objection should be the objection should be accepted. Okay? It doesn't stand up in the court of morality, behavior, whatever you want to call it. It's useless. It's silly. It's a never-ending argument. And there's no sense in arguing it at all. Why waste your energy? Why waste your energy? Okay, we reached the time limit as far as I'm concerned, so I want to make a few quick comments about the show itself and how you can be a part of it. First of all, I want to make a major correction to something I said in my last show. When I delete videos from YouTube, they're also deleted from Google+. So anything with copyrighted material that was deleted is no longer available on either source. That being said, we move on. You can reach this show at hdt2010@roadrunner.com. You can reach this show by commenting on heresdathing.com's YouTube page, heresdathing.com's Facebook page, or heresdathing.com's Google Plus page. And I implore you to do so because I'm keeping it short now. I'm not trying to bore people, but I need your feedback. You need to make comments. You need to hate me, love me, call me an idiot. I don't care what you do, but as long as you make a comment, I can address it in some manner. You'll never be wrong. You may not always be right, but you'll never be wrong. And as I've said many times before, you tell me what you're thinking, and I will tell you why you're thinking it. And so, this show comes to a conclusion.